I'm going to go ahead and start broadcasting. So, and here we go. Thank you everyone for joining. We'll be starting in just a few minutes. Welcome everyone. We'll be starting in a few minutes, just waiting for a couple more people to jump online. All right, we'll give it another minute for everybody to go ahead and join, and we will be starting. Thanks again, everyone, for joining today's webinar. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for joining today's webinar. The title of today's webinar is Collections Communication, It's Time for Change. Just a little housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded for archival purposes. If you have any questions or have any issues and you need assistance with anything, please use the chat feature. It's on the bottom of the Zoom screen. You can chat it to the group or to myself. My name is Diane Bosanjek. I will be your IT support for today's webinar. We will have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. There's a Q&A section in Zoom where you can go ahead and type in your questions, and I will be relaying those to Dr. Robert Gropp. So without further ado, here is Dr. Robert Gropp, and he will be doing today's webinar.
Thank you, Diane, and welcome everyone. Today, I want to talk a little bit about some work that the Biodiversity Collections Network has done, share some insights, and offer some opportunities for the community at large to contribute and help inform next steps and things like that. Before we get too far into it, for those of you that might be new to either this community or this topic, if you've not participated in a prior program, I'm going to start with a little bit of classic sort of DC alphabet soup to sort of help everybody get on the same page. I will endeavor not to use too many acronyms, but I most certainly will. And so I think these are some of the organizations and names that are going to be potentially common in my talk. So if you're unfamiliar with them, these are the organizations and entities that may surface. So hopefully this will help just sort of offer a little bit of ground truthing as we go through. Again, this program is part of the Biodiversity Collections Network, which is a National Science Foundation funded research coordination network grant to the American Institute of Biological Sciences. And we work closely with our partner organizations, the Natural Science Collections Alliance, the Society for Preservation of Natural History Collections, and iDigBio, all of whom were the organizations that sort of came together to pull together this project a number of years ago. And subsequent to that, we've now grown to have among our community 38 additional supporting organizations, so entities that have endorsed the concept and the objectives of BCoN and what I'll talk about in a minute, the NIBA, which is the Network Integrated Biodiversity Collections Alliance. So that's the landscape. And again, what the purpose of the BCoN grant is and has been and continues to be is to help really sort of expand investment and engagement in the biodiversity collections community, particularly those elements of the community that have an active interest in the digitization of biodiversity collection specimens and associated data, both for their use or for the development of tools to improve curation and stewardship, but also to enable new research and education opportunities. And so that's part of what or a large part of what BCoN is trying to do is help organize the community, identify issues, and offer some recommendations for collective action to help the community more broadly move forward. So the work of BCoN at this particular point is sort of directed by an advisory council, and you see the members here. So we represent a cross-cut and a cross-section of the biodiversity collections community. These are sort of your focal points and points of contact. All of us are also then very actively interested in hearing from people and reaching out to additional communities to sort of pull additional information into the meetings and workshops that we sort of plan and move forward with. So I encourage you'll see where everyone's located, and hopefully you recognize either one of the names or one of the institutions. And I would encourage you, as we move forward, or as you have interest, to please reach out to any of us at any time to share insights or offer recommendations or to gather information about what BCoN is up to. Again, as I mentioned, BCoN is now on the back half of our initial grant cycle. So we've been involved with a number of different projects and activities thus far, and this is a list of a number of the workshops that we've already organized and a few that are in the process of being planned out for this year. And the highlighted program at the top there, Collections Communications, is the program that I'll actually be talking about today. But a number of these other programs will be the topic of future webinars, and with the exception of the NIBA assessment, which was a webinar that we offered last week and will soon be archived on the BCoN website if you'd like to go back and if you missed that and would like to see what it was all about. You'll see that we have a number of program workshops that we've conducted related to a number of aspects of biodiversity collections, digitization, and data use. The ISOBank program, for example, was an effort to sort of build a bridge and look for opportunities for partnership between the isotopic research community, ecology, and natural history museums. And so that was another one of those examples of sort of reaching into new communities and finding new research opportunities and ways to link biodiversity data and collections to other communities to enable new research. So that'll be a forthcoming program. We're also in the process now of planning a workshop that will be offered this fall that's going to sort of look at future directions and opportunities. So you see a whole mix of program areas there, and we'll be continuing to update that as we go forward. We also, every time there's a report or any kind of request for information, we post that on the website. So as reports become available from these programs, you'll be able to go to the BCoN website and access them. I will draw your attention to the line here that says data attribution and integration, and note that just today we posted a workshop report from a meeting that was just held in February at the University of Kansas on that issue. And so that is on the home page of the BCoN website, and I'd encourage you after today's program to go there, review that document, and we provide guidance on how you can share your thoughts and comments on that. So we'd like to sort of see if there's additional insights or perspectives the community might have to share in addition to those that surfaced during the workshop. And these will then all be used as we move forward to plan additional meetings and workshops in the coming weeks. Again, as I mentioned, this is the second webinar in a series that we're conducting this year. So I encourage you to check the events section of the BCoN website. You see the web address right there. The events page section is at the top of the BCoN website. So you can click on that and it'll provide you with a link to a calendar of events. And from there you can see when we have future programs scheduled and register for them as well. Also, for those of you that are social media fans, I encourage you to follow us on Twitter, which is where we're really trying to push information out to reach people in a timely fashion. So you'll see our Twitter handle here on this page. It's at Biocol Network, and so it's a little bit longer than liked, but that's the source for tracking what we're up to on a more regular basis. It's also a great way for you, if you have questions or suggestions, to tweet them to that address, and that's one of the more timely ways for us to stay in contact with people. So again, from the alphabet soup that we started today's program with, you saw NIBA, which is the Network Integrated Biocollections Alliance. And this is, for those of you that may not be familiar with it, it was a scientific community generated and inspired strategic plan that was developed almost a decade ago now. And it's set forth at that point a rather aggressive and long-term vision for how the community could work together to digitize the specimens and their associated data in a timely fashion and over a defined period of time. It actually set a course for a 10-year initiative with a $100 million investment from the National Science Foundation to sort of make significant progress toward unlocking the vast amounts of data that are available in our nation's biodiversity collections and natural history museums. So it was again a community-inspired opportunity where the collections community itself came together and collectively articulated a vision and research opportunities, and put it down on paper and pushed it forward to various decision makers who acted on it and have subsequently made the investments necessary to move the needle forward. So again, the NIBA program that was initially outlined had 3 large, ambitious goals, and you'll see those articulated on this particular slide. Really, they all relate to developing the tools, techniques, and community practices to digitally capture and make available in a sustainable and ongoing fashion images and associated data from our nation's biodiversity collections. So these are the 3 big overarching goals, but of course, what is often needed when we identify strategic plans are the actual steps. How do we implement the plan? How do we implement the goals? What needs to happen in order to achieve those overarching and ambitious goals? And so the AIBS actually convened a workshop following the publication of the initial strategic plan to convene some experts from the community, representative of various stakeholders, to explore what the more precise actions might be. And that resulted in 6 implementation goals or strategies that you see identified on this slide that were really viewed as necessary actions to help ultimately achieve those 3 overarching goals. Now, after BCoN came to be, which, as I mentioned earlier, is really designed to sort of help figure out how to achieve these goals and build the community's capacity to sustainably implement and advance the goals of NIBA. We came to realize that a common thread to achieving any of these or all of those goals is really improved communication within the biodiversity collections community, both within the community, but then also externally into necessary audiences. And so early in the process, the BCoN objectives and activities, really one of the first meetings I think that we actually wound up organizing was what we called the BCoN Collections Communications Workshop. And it brought together various stakeholders from the biodiversity collections community, broadly defined, so that included a very diverse group of people, to explore these 4 questions. And these are the objectives of that workshop, were to identify opportunities and barriers to communicating the benefits of natural science collections to decision makers and the public, to explore the opportunities provided by national digitization initiatives to engage new stakeholders. In essence, how is NIBA creating new opportunities to engage these stakeholders? To identify existing communication resources and assess what the community might need by way of new tools, techniques, practices, and standards for improving communication. And to explore the development of a more networked and connected community where messages are shared and and communicated in a more consistent and proactive fashion. So those were the big 4 goals. It was a 2-day workshop that we convened at the Field Museum in Chicago. And we had about 30 individuals participate, representing a really, as I mentioned, a very diverse cross-section of the stakeholder community. And so it was individuals from large and small collections, both living stock collections and natural stock or natural science collections. We had administrators, we had research staff, outreach personnel, government relations staff, senior, mid-career, and early career professionals. So we really tried to have a full spectrum of the community participating in that workshop to really sort of leverage shared expertise and interests. And the full report, which is the basis for today's program, is available on the BCoN website. Here's the rather long address for it, but again, you can access it from the main homepage by clicking on the groups page, and you'll see a collection communications group that has some information. So after that 2-day meeting, there was a not surprisingly, given the purpose of the meeting and the participants who were in the room, there was one sort of general overarching, very big and very significant recommendation and realization, and that was that really the community had not been and has struggled at times to have a coherent and resonant message, that there was really a need for better communication with different audiences, and that was everyone from the funders, whether they're elected officials or agency officials, to university and institutional administrators, on down to other researchers. And so part of the realization was that oftentimes the scientific community gets a little into the weeds, is very focused on individual research objectives, and does not always, or has not historically, sort of sold the story of all the really exciting research that is being done with biodiversity collections, or the opportunities that arise as we apply new techniques and tools and develop new techniques and tools to digitize collections, and then to use that data in research that's really answering questions that are of great significance to society. So again, the overall realization was that although there's progress being made, there's really a need to do things differently and to engage a little bit more effectively. And so kind of along that line, it's a matter of thinking about your audience more so than the community historically has. So we often, scientists are very good about talking to their colleagues, to people working in the same field, to maybe people in the same institution, but not always. You get a little bit less good at it when we move between fields and disciplines, and then it's a sort of a continuum of diminishing returns as we start finding new audiences. So there's really the recognition that we need to think about the audiences that we're trying to engage and how best to communicate with them, and to recognize that we have some communicators who are effective at that within the community, and at some points and some places along the way, we need to engage additional individuals or organizations and institutions who can also help tell the story. And so to think about it in the context of, every piece of art is a little bit different. It reaches different audiences in different ways. It evokes different thoughts, feelings, and emotions. And so we have to think about that in a similar way when we talk about the benefits and excitement and opportunities arising from digitization. So we need to think much more strategically and proactively about who and what our story is, who we're telling it to, and how we're telling it. And along that line, it's important that the scientific community not sort of allow the audiences that we're trying to influence to write their own story. You don't want to provide something that's so vague or so abstract that audiences can sort of find their own direction. You want to paint a picture for them that's going to help them see the big picture and understand what you're talking about in the context of something bigger. So historically, we do a good job about talking about what our individual projects are or what we're working on, but we don't always necessarily contextualize it as well as we can. And most people are going to be a little bit more moved by the big picture. They want to understand the why. Why are you doing that? What does that mean for me? What are the implications of that? Then they're going to want to go down, and once they invest in that, they'll start to dig a little bit deeper and be a little bit more interested in the techniques or the processes. Scientists, we often want to talk about how we're doing things, and instead of talking about the significance or the implications. So sort of a need to flip around how we approach things, but also to think about then how we're communicating these different messages. And so again, the workshop actually generated 7 somewhat precise recommendations for the community at large, and you'll see those listed here. I won't spend a lot of time on this particular slide because I'm going to go through these in the next few slides and talk about sort of what is some of the work that's been happening relative to some of these, and some of the work that still needs to be done. But you'll see that there's a number of these really that relate to communicating a better story more effectively. And so to start with sort of what's happening with the first 2 recommendations, on the left of your screen you'll see the first 2 recommendations, and then on the right you'll see sort of some of the work that's been happening. So the first recommendation is the community must articulate a compelling and inclusive long-term vision for natural history collections. So there was the standard deliberation at the workshop about how we don't always have the big picture queued up, and aren't necessarily all singing from similar songbooks. And so I think that we have had that with NIBA and the work that's been supported the last 8 years or so through the National Science Foundation and through various digitization campaigns. So there has been that, and that does show that when we do articulate a coherent and cohesive message, there is traction and there is opportunity to move things forward. I will say that sort of one of the challenges is then to look at, okay, what's the next story, or what are the next 2 or 3 stories that the community can all tell? And one of the things that BCoN is working on now, and as I mentioned at the start of today's talk, we'll be organizing a workshop this fall, is around queuing up that and looking at that next big picture message. What are the next big opportunities and challenges that we can collectively work toward? So a little bit more meat will be put on the bone, so to speak, of this, the question, the first recommendation around having a large, overarching, big picture kind of message. So that's something that's in the works. And I would say that there are other parts of the community that are also working on that. So it'll be a group effort to sort of figure out what that looks like and where that can move. The second recommendation you'll see is in the bottom left of this screen, and that's that the community should work with existing community serving organizations. And this is something that the NSC Alliance, which is the organization that has among its members natural history museums, botanic gardens, other biodiversity collections from across the country, and AIBS, which has both individual and institutional members representing the breadth of science and is very active on the policy and communications front, are working on. And so between the 2 of them, these 2 organizations, there's great reach into the institutional leadership as well as to the policymaking and public affairs communities. And so these 2 organizations, now that things are moving forward a little bit more, are in the process of identifying some new opportunities to engage and communicate with policymakers. They've historically done this particularly relative to funding issues, but we're now looking at organizing some congressional briefings and developing some other materials that can help to share the story of natural history collections and the benefits of digitizing and how that enables new research and education. The third recommendation from the Chicago workshop is there on the left of your screen, and you'll see that as the community must engage new stakeholders to increase the sustainability of digitization efforts. And so this is something that there's always great opportunity for more work in this space. There is, in fact, still a fair amount of work that could be done to engage new research communities and the broader research community. You'll see that if you think back to the list of workshops, when on the earlier screen, you saw the one I mentioned and foreshadowed a little bit in talking about ISOBank, and that's one of these examples. How do we engage with additional research communities to sort of broaden the awareness of biodiversity collections and their data, but also to engage them in research and to broaden the number of individuals who can help tell the story of the benefits associated with biodiversity collections and their usefulness to other fields. Importantly, too, and this is something that we spent a fair amount of time talking about at the Chicago workshop, is that there are, in fact, a lot of additional opportunities that are increasingly becoming very accessible for natural history collections. And you'll see that sort of on the top right here. The number of citizen science opportunities or online programs, webinars, podcasts, YouTube programs have really become much more easy to develop and implement. They're not nearly as costly as they used to be. It's really sort of a matter of time and energy and expertise. But one of the things that was really recognized as well is that the community, and this is part of the culture shift that can happen in the community, is that there are certain organizations that are already out and about and working in these areas, and as their success and impact grows, that offers opportunity and benefit to others. So not every institution necessarily needs to create its own podcast or to create its own program. The community could, in fact, work a little bit more cohesively to leverage the accomplishments and benefits of existing programs. So one of the examples was discussed was the great work of the Brain Scoop folks at the Field Museum, and how as that draws people into museums and captures their interest, that's something that benefits all biodiversity collections. So there's a ways that we can collectively sort of figure out how to celebrate each other's success using these existing vehicles. And so there's those sorts of things. We're also now seeing, new tool development. There was just an article this month in Bioscience around evaluating the impacts of the Leaf Snap program, which is an iPhone app that allows people to go out and capture images of tree leaves and then bounce those back into larger databases for work on climate-related research or niche modeling, things like that. That's just one example. There are others, and there are a growing number of those. So those are all excellent ways to engage individuals or other science enthusiasts in biodiversity collections related work. So sort of engaging with that broader citizen science community is a great opportunity. And then, in fact, relative to digitization, there's the We Dig Bio effort, which is an outgrowth of the NSF-funded I Dig Bio program down at the University of Florida and Florida State University, in which they're actively engaging individuals in efforts to digitize collections. So it's a way to bring people into the collection, introduce them to it, help them develop some skills and awareness of what's happening and the opportunities, but also to learn a little. So it's a mutually beneficial program and opportunity. So there are these existing opportunities and vehicles that are out there that really do help build not just the awareness of biodiversity collections and digitization efforts, but that ultimately help to build the stakeholder base. They can be very helpful when trying to promote actions that result in increased funding or that help stimulate new investments in biodiversity collections. And importantly, in the ultimate use of the information and the science that's generated as a result of research on biodiversity. So recommendation 4 and 5, you'll see on this slide, and same pattern. The top left is the 4th recommendation from the workshop, and you'll see that, again, this is another sort of recommendation to the community that it needs to improve and do a little bit better job of communicating the outcomes and the benefits of digitization efforts. So a lot of money has been invested, but now we need to make sure that we're really taking what we've learned, what we've developed, the new tools, and sharing that with the people who've made the commitments to invest in these endeavors. And I think that the community has been doing a much better job of doing these sorts of circling back to the policymakers or the funders to share the benefits of what was done. And on the right, you'll see that as part of that, one of the programs that's been growing in impact, and that the collections community has increasingly been participating in, is something that AIBS organizes around what we call the Biological Sciences Congressional District Visits. And it's an opportunity, a nationwide commitment and program over the course of the month of August to get policymakers at the federal and state level to visit research facilities and centers so that they can see what's involved in doing research, and who the players are, and how the students engage or benefit from it, what the researchers are doing, the kinds of tools and techniques or new technologies that are being deployed. And so we've seen increased engagement with this. We've seen that the members of the Natural Science Collections Alliance, as well as Spinach, the Society for Preservation of Natural History Collections, those two organizations have been sponsoring this program for a number of years now, and their membership are increasingly participating in these efforts, which is very, very important, because it's what we've seen are more and more members of Congress, for example, coming out and touring natural history museums to actually see what's going on. So not just the exhibits in the front, but they're going through and they're looking through the microscopes, they're looking at the databases, they're looking at the specimens in the back, and it's an opportunity to really talk about how those sort of behind the scenes aspects of a natural history museum or biodiversity collection are in fact very current, cutting edge research specimens and tools and techniques. So these are important efforts that I think the community is now becoming more skilled and engaged in, and I encourage everybody participating in today's program to also consider participating in these sorts of events. The 5th recommendation is something that we've really kind of struggled with and have not made a lot of progress on. I would say not a lot of effort has actually been given to it at this point, but it's something that we'd be interested in some input and suggestions about, and that's really figuring out some ways, some metrics that can be developed to start chronicling and tracking what works well and under what circumstances, and to really evaluate the effectiveness of different communication strategies and models. So that's an area that there's still some need for work. The final 2 recommendations really centered around number 6, which was the development of new tools and communication tactics. And the 7th recommendation was that there was a greater need for all members of the scientific community to develop and to engage in some additional professional development, particularly as it relates to communications and outreach. Not that everyone must be a communications all-star or in charge of outreach, but that it's really now become a matter that everyone's job involves a little bit of outreach and engagement. And so there's a need for everyone to kind of practice and hone some skills, and to appreciate that, again, as I mentioned earlier, the way we often communicate within the scientific community and amongst ourselves is different than the way one needs to communicate with a policymaker or a member of the local garden club, or with the 4-H group, or whomever. So there's a real need to sort of come back and become a little bit familiar with some strategies and tools for doing that, communicating more effectively. And so this is one of the areas that AIBS, following this initial workshop, kind of came into the mix and developed a number of programs that I'm happy to say are being accessed by a number of members of the biodiversity collections community from across the country. And so this slide just illustrates we have a number of programs that are available that range from 1 and 2 day communication training boot camps that really help people hone their messaging, understand how best to tell their story to different audiences, to learn how to participate effectively in news media interviews, things like that, to also just programs that are focused on helping scientists write effectively and impactfully for non-technical audiences. So this is a program that was designed not to help people write a research paper or a grant, but to write an effective press release, to communicate more effectively with university or institutional administrators through technical memos and decision memos and things like that. So it's a different kind of technical writing. It also covers, our writing program also covers things like how to craft blog posts that are effective and reach unique audiences. So it's a real range of different writing styles, and so it helps people think about what goes into that, and to help people also identify, which kinds of outreach are you more comfortable with, or do you enjoy participating in. So done that, and again, our communication training programs are programs that we offer in DC, and we couple them up with events where following the program, scientists go and meet with either agency personnel or with members of Congress or other scientific society leaders to talk about the importance of their research. But we also can bring them to institutions where we can reach a large audience and help people sort of practice and hone their communication skills. And so I'm happy to say that we have, with each program, had a growing number of biodiversity scientists, individuals affiliated with everything from botanic gardens and living stock collections to natural history museums and university collections. So really the whole spectrum have been coming to these programs, and I think benefiting greatly from them. So these are some of the initiatives that are a direct result of the BCoN workshop in Chicago to focus on communication training and to provide scientists with some new tools and communication strategies, which are things that we share through these programs. So those are definitely opportunities for people to engage in telling the story of collections. Now, finally, I'd like to sort of ask for your help, and anyone participating here in today's program. We appreciate your interest in today's topic, but I'd also welcome any information you'd like to share with us about an exciting program that you may conduct or participate in at your local institution, something that you've participated in that you think works well, or something that you think, if there's a resource or some kind of reference material or toolkit that you think would be helpful to individuals in different institutions, to let us know so that we can figure out who might have that resource, or we can help share those resources with other members of the community, or we can figure out how to develop those resources. So we're not particular about how people get in touch with us. If you're a social media inclined individual, we recently established a hashtag to capture information about institutional outreach programs and communication resources. And so that's hashtag NSCA engagement. So you're welcome to post to that. again, as I mentioned, the Biocollections Network Twitter handle is another way that you could reach us, or you can point us to resources that we would happily share with others. Or if you're interested in the more old-fashioned email, you can send us an email at publicpolicy@aibs.org, and then we will gather that information or get back to you and figure out the best way to exchange information and resources. Again, in an ideal world, we'd like to create a bit of an archive and a resource clearinghouse that we can share resources from different institutions and sort of allow people to benefit from the broader community's efforts, so that not everyone's having to reinvent the wheel anytime they might have a need. So these are some opportunities specifically around collections communications that are available, and that we'd welcome your input. So I hope that as you go forward from today, as you think of things, or if you already have ideas, please do share them with us. And then finally, before we open it up to any kind of questions, just remind you that this is in fact the second of a series of webinars. And so our next one is on May 23rd. And as I mentioned, that'll be discussing the most recent workshop report on data attribution and data integration. Again, that report just was posted today, so I encourage everyone to go download a copy of that. It's relatively short, but it's very information rich, has some really good recommendations in it. And we'd like to have receive additional community input on those. So what you think is, if you think there's something missing or something that could be that you feel strongly about that's in there that you think really requires significant attention, please draw that to our attention. And again, you'll see the various mechanisms for sharing your thoughts and input with us. So with that, I'm going to stop, and I will happily take any questions that anybody might have.
To ask a question, you can use the Q&A feature on the bottom of the Zoom panel, right next to sort of the middle of your screen. Maureen, I see you, sorry, Maureen, Maura, I see you raising your hand. If you want to type in your question, and I can relay it to Rob, either in the chat box or in the Q&A session, Q&A feature. Oh, here you go. Here you go, Rob. Have you considered reaching out to historians who are interested in the history of life sciences and who often find natural history collections and archives useful in their, I'm guessing, area of expertise? It's got cut off after archives useful in there. So pretty much reaching out to, in their work. Thank you, Maura.
So that hasn't actually come up, and that is a great idea. And thank you. We'll definitely put that on the list. That's a really great idea. I think you hit on something perfect there. So we will do that. And if you happen to know any, please let us know. I can't have covered everything so thoroughly.
You are just that good of a presenter, Rob. So yes, if anybody else has any other questions, again, you can use the chat feature or the Q&A, whichever one is convenient for you.
And if not, you are welcome to reach out to me at any time, and I'd be happy to get back to you as well. So.
Let's give another minute or two in case anybody else has any other questions. I'm not seeing any more questions. So again, if you do think of any questions, please feel free to reach out to us and let us know. I'd like to thank everyone for participating in today's webinar. Again, please visit the website at bcon.aibs.org to see the upcoming webinars that we have coming up. Thank you everyone for joining. Rob, thank you. And we will, this has been recorded and it will be posted onto the BCoN website. So you can come back and watch it again if you would like to refresh your memory there. So thank you again, everyone. Thank you, Rob.